Before the sun rises and after the sun sets, the growers of our food are busy planting, nurturing, harvesting, working hard to feed the world. These heroes are always on call. They never give up, forever committed to doing more for people and the planet. Farmers are here for you, and we are here for farmers. Growing food has been a way of life for centuries, but the way we grow has evolved. We are leading the evolution of farming, using science to capture the data stored in soil, plants, rain, and air. Simplifying complex intelligence and turning it into actionable insights with Farm Command, our powerful digital platform. We're giving farmers an edge with our innovative suite of digital tools, precision hardware, unmatched services, and boots-on-the-ground support. Empowering farmers all over the world to make better decisions for their farm, for the community, and for the environment. Our highly trained data scientists collect and analyze soil from different areas of the field to prescribe an efficient fertilizer application. Our weather stations that our professionals install and calibrate provide the most accurate weather data tailored to farmers' fields. Our robust suite of satellite imagery provides a detailed view of crop health even before problems arise. Brand-agnostic telematics devices installed in equipment ensure seamless data collection from anywhere, anytime. We are digitizing the farm and creating a digital ecosystem that not only connects farmers to their fields, but to key stakeholders and trusted advisors. So while yesterday's farmer had to make their best guess, today's farmer knows how to grow more, faster, and more sustainably than ever. Together, we can support the heroes that feed the world. Our commitment and dedication to innovation, science, and technology is transforming farming for the benefit of us all. Sustainable growing, a healthier planet, more food for the world. And this is only the beginning.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Farmers Edge YouTube live stream. My name is Jimmy Shand. I'm the multimedia producer here at Farmers Edge, and I'll be your host / moderator for this live stream. Today's topic is important considerations for managing herbicide applications, and with me today is our herbicide expert, Nicole Osterwold. Now, Nicole is a territory sales agronomist here at Farmers Edge. She's based out of Saskatchewan. Now, like I said, she will be talking about herbicide application and touching on areas such as planning for herbicide application, how to choose a herbicide, the importance of water quality, and so much more. And also, I'd like to let you know if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just please type them in the chat box. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nicole.
Hi, everyone.
So, Nicole, why don't you give us a little history about yourself?
Sure. So I'm actually pretty new to Farmers Edge, but I've been in the agriculture industry for about 8 years now. Graduated from the University of Manitoba in 2014 and then moved to Saskatchewan and been enjoying my career in agriculture out here ever since.
Right on. Well, good to have you, Nicole. Really happy to have you do this with us. So let's just kick it off with the first question. When it comes to herbicide applications, what is the first step when planning your herbicide application?
Sure. So the first thing we want to do is scout. We need to scout to understand our weed pressures. So in order to choose the right herbicide, we need to know what we're trying to control out there. So which weeds are out there, how big are they, how intense is that pressure? Knowing the crop stage, the weed spectrum, and the weed size are really key for proper field management.
Great. Okay, so after you've got that all figured out, what are some of the factors to consider when you're choosing which herbicide to use?
Yeah, so there's definitely lots that comes to play when you're choosing which herbicide to apply. The first and foremost being crop type. So we want to make sure that the herbicide we're using is actually registered for use on the crop we're planning to spray it on. Some watchouts here, there's some products that are registered for on some pulses, but not others. For example, peas versus lentils. Or we might have a product that's registered for use on spring wheat, but not durum wheat. So it's just always a good idea to double check the label and confirm the herbicide is registered for the use on the intended crop. As well, we want to look at the application window of the product. So we want to make sure that we're going to be at the proper crop stage and weed stage for application timing. So the crop stage is really important for, crop safety. And then as well, that weed stage is important for increased weed control. Spraying outside of the application window for the crop can cause some crop damage. And then trying to take down those weeds that are just either too big or too small to properly hit can reduce the efficacy of our herbicide as well. One place that this might have an impact where you might find yourself in this situation wondering is with our wheat crops. So for example, some of the herbicides that we use on our wheat crops do have a larger application window where you can go in at like a 2-leaf application, whereas others, you might need to wait until 4-leaf. So if we scout our fields, that really helps us understand what product we want to use. Can we wait until 4-leaf? Or is that, weed pressure there and our crop stage is smaller and we need to go in sooner? There's definitely advantages to both products. So understanding your weed pressure and crop timing will help you choose the best product. Just important to keep in mind, timing is really important when it comes to weed control. This is key when we talk about anything preventing yield loss as well, and just managing those weeds properly. Proper weed control timing can help us prevent weed escapes that, will cause increased pressure in that field later on and just create future headaches. The next thing we want to consider when we are choosing our herbicides, herbicide groups and the mode of action. So it's always important to consider the impact and possibility of herbicide resistance. So to do that, we want to take into account, and rotate our herbicide groups and use multiple modes of effective action when we're choosing our herbicides. And when I say multiple modes of effective action, effective being that key word, because just because we have multiple modes of action in the product doesn't mean that all of those modes of action will have activity on those weeds that we're trying to kill. So really important that we're using a product with multiple modes of effective action. So again, just rotating those herbicide groups, using multiple modes of effective action, just really important when we're considering the impact and potential of herbicide resistance. Another thing we want to take into account, like I said, there's quite a few factors here, but is crop rotation. So many herbicides that we are going to use have recropping restrictions. So that's going to impact which crops you can safely grow on that field within a certain time frame. A certain herbicide might be really strong on a certain weed that you're trying to manage, but it might go against crops that you have planned in your rotation. Again, scouting is going to help us decide this. By understanding our weed pressure, we can decide, do we want to adjust our crop rotation, or do we want to choose a different herbicide to manage that weed issue on the field? Sometimes, two products can be very similar, and one thing it might come down to is formulation and package size. So our herbicides are available in multiple formulations and packaging sizes as well. And you may prefer certain ones just due to ease of use. A lot of this usually comes down to your farm's specific experience, dealing with certain formulations, the acres and logistics that, your farm is dealing with in particular might help you decide when two herbicides are really similar. The formulation and package size just might help you decide which way you want to go there. And then the last thing we want to consider when we're picking our herbicide is just our return on investment and the cost of that herbicide. Herbicides are another crop input on the farm, and we need to understand the cost per acre and how it's going to impact your bottom line. So really, again, scouting, key thing, that's our first step. It really helps us with this decision as well. So knowing what's out there helps us in our management decisions, helps us understand the depth of the issue, and even when and how to best manage that weed. So maybe we're scouting and finding it in the in-crop application timing, but it's actually easier and better to deal with that specific weed post-harvest or pre-harvest. So just other things like that, we need to understand, is it necessary to spend that extra money to manage that weed properly now, or can we maybe look at doing it a different time? Or just in general, sometimes those weeds are really hard to control and manage, and we just need to put the extra dollars on the table in those situations.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my next question is, what are some of the factors that would impact like herbicide efficacy and crop safety?
Keep in mind when we're talking about herbicide efficacy and crop safety is that we want those plants to be actively growing. So actively growing plants, that allows the weeds to take in that herbicide, ensuring it gets to the target site within that plant. And it also ensures our crops are able to metabolize that herbicide properly, allowing for increased crop safety. So again, just actively growing plants during the time of application just helps increase that crop safety and our herbicide efficacy overall.
Okay. And in agriculture, it really seems that we're always talking about the weather. So how does weather itself impact the efficacy of your herbicide application?
Yeah, I guess there's always a reason that we're always talking about weather, and it just really does play such a huge part in everything we do. Weather conditions prior to, at the time of, and following herbicide applications can have an impact on herbicide efficacy. So prior to application, we want those plants to be actively growing. So any cool, dry conditions prior to herbicide application can impact that herbicide efficacy because that can impact how well those and actively growing those plants are. This is particularly critical after a frost event. That's one thing that I always try to, highlight or bring forward when we're talking about conditions prior to spraying. And there are some guidelines that we can follow when spraying after a frost. So after a light frost event, we want to wait until those daytime temperatures have reached 8 to 10 degrees Celsius for a few hours. After a heavy frost, those plants are going to need some more time to recover. So it's usually a good idea to wait till spray till you've had a few days where those daytime temperatures were above 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. When we talk contrary to frost, extreme heat can be an issue as well. Plants are often going to shut down during those high temperatures. So if we want to avoid sprayer applications during excessive heat, those high 20 to 30 degree weather days, that might mean, that you have to avoid applications during the afternoon and the heat of the day. So that might impact your logistics and your planning on when you want to get those sprayer applications done. But again, just wanting to make sure that those weeds are actively growing and working that into our planning as much as possible. Just like prior to, the weather conditions when we're actually doing the application definitely have an impact, again, like I just said with the heat. But many herbicides have conditions that they perform better under. So glufosinate ammonium, for example, it prefers warm, sunny conditions at application timing, and spraying that product under cool, cloudy conditions can actually cause us to have reduced efficacy of that product. Diquat, different product, it works best when sprayed under cloudy conditions. So this can sometimes be cloudy days or in the evening or early morning, and then followed by sunny conditions the following day. So always a good idea to have a look at the label and see if there are recommended conditions for spraying. That's just one thing that we can try and pay attention to get the most out of our herbicide as well. And then when it comes to conditions following the herbicide application, the one thing I would note is just the rain fast of the product. So the rain fast of the product, just how long it takes for the product to be absorbed by the plant, and giving it sufficient time to reach its target site within the plant. The rain fast of the product do vary, but common ones that we'll see for herbicides, usually like that 2 to 4 to 6 hour rain fast interval. So they do vary by product, but those are some of the common ones we see when we're discussing herbicides. So again, just when we're planning to spray, look at that forecast. Want to make sure that we have more than just enough time to apply the product, but also enough time to have that product applied and complete that rain fast interval prior to a possible rain event on that field.
Okay, so yeah, conditions after the application of your herbicide are just as important as during and before. So next question, there are so many things that a grower needs to consider when it comes to getting the most out of your herbicide application. So even when a grower is doing their very best, it seems that it could be quite hard to get them all right, all their decisions right, since Mother Nature has the final say. So, what would you say is the one thing a grower can do to help with the efficacy with our herbicide and help carry the load for the products that a grower is applying?
Water quality and amount. My number one answer to what can I do is always add more water. It is the cheapest input on the farm and can have a major impact on our sprayer applications. I definitely understand, it adds time, it makes logistics a bit more difficult, but proper water coverage can have such a big impact. High water volumes lead to improved coverage. It helps improve efficacy of those tough to control weeds, and it helps reduce any crop stress that might be caused by the herbicide application as well. So again, like I said, my number one answer to what can I do is always add more water.
Okay, so water quality is super important. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Exactly what you mean by water quality?
Yeah, sure. So water is the primary carrier for herbicides. Over 99% of the spray solution consists of water. So that means that what we're adding to the tank can have a huge impact on our herbicide efficacy. And for that reason, we need to care about it.
So, what are some water quality factors that a grower needs to consider, like specific water quality factors?
Sure. So, honestly, before we get into that, probably have to do a bit of a mini chemistry lesson here. I know I would usually tune out for this, so hopefully our viewers don't. But yeah, to really explain that well, we do kind of have to start with some basic chemistry. So, acids are compounds that release hydrogen ions when dissolved in water. Weak acids release hydrogen ions, but just slightly. So herbicides that are weak acids dissociate, or what I call split in two, when they're mixed in water. So that means a portion of the herbicide will dissociate and the rest will not. And the amount of compounds that will dissociate or split in two depends on the pH of our water. So dissociated herbicide molecules have a negative charge. So after they split in two, they now have a negative charge. They can keep that negative charge, or they can bind to other positively charged cations, which often can be present in the water source. What happens when these molecules bind to those cations? It can antagonize herbicide efficacy just by reducing absorption and herbicide activity within the plant. So it's definitely a problem when that happens. So really we prefer, because herbicide compounds that remain whole and don't dissociate are more readily absorbed by the plant than those that do. So definitely prefer them to stay that way. And some insolubilized and suspended herbicide precipitates, that can cause issues. It can block nozzles and screens and deposit on the plant surface, reducing delivery of that active ingredient to that target site within the plant, which is where we need it to go to, get that plant controlled. So yeah, again, bit of chemistry there. Hopefully you're still with me. But yeah, that being said, that first water quality factor we want to consider is the water pH. So that water pH measures the concentration of hydrogen ions that are in the water. As that pH decreases, the concentration of the hydrogen ions increases and the water becomes more acidic. So acids dissociate less in the water that is more acidic. So with our herbicides, the best results would occur when the pH of the water is low enough that the herbicides don't dissociate or dissociate very little. What we've seen, water pH that is close to neutral, so around 7, does not pose any major issues. It's usually when we see those extreme pH levels, so less than 4 or more than 8, where we can see a bit of an impact. Typically, the herbicides that we see the most issues with are glyphosate, bentazone, some of those DIM group herbicides, and then the 2,4-D as well. So those are the ones that we typically see the most impact from pH.
Okay, so let's say I'm a grower and it turns out I do have a water pH issue. What do I do?
So there's a couple things you can do. You can purchase pH adjusters to add to spray solutions to maintain that optimal pH. One watch out here, though, Some herbicides are already formulated to act as a pH buffer, so you don't need that. And some herbicides should just not have these types of products added in as well. So if you are concerned about the pH of your water, I would recommend that you consult the herbicide label or speak with your company rep of the herbicide product prior to adding anything to the tank, just to make sure that they are good and that they don't see any issues with that tank mix occurring.
Okay, so there's a bunch of different key minerals in water. What would the key minerals be that you would be the ones that you would measure?
Yeah, I will speak to Saskatchewan water just because that's what I am more familiar with.
Of course, yeah.
Some of the common things that we see in our water, calcium, magnesium, sodium sulfate, and chloride. And how we measure that is total dissolved solid, or TDS. So that's the sum of all minerals in a water sample, and we measure that in parts per million. So the higher the TDS, or total dissolved solid, the higher the electrical conductivity of the water. So electrical conductivity, well, that's a hard word today, or AC, is used to estimate the total dissolved solids in the water. So if the EC is less than 500, that's usually where we kind of say herbicide efficacy issues with this are unlikely to arise. So again, that 500 and below is usually what we consider an okay level. When we speak about minerals in water, though, water hardness definitely is always something that usually comes up. So water hardness is caused by the amount of calcium and magnesium present. So these cations can attach to negatively charged herbicide molecules. So again, those dissociated herbicide molecules, the ones that are split in two that I was talking about earlier. And then that reduces the absorption into the plant and herbicide efficacy. Some of the things that we see impacted by water hardness, glyphosate for sure. So efficacy can be reduced if hardness is over 350 for like those lower rates of glyphosate that we might be using, and can be reduced if hardness is over 700. So for higher rates, when we're bumping it up to control hard to control perennials and those types of weeds. 2,4-D is another product whose efficacy can be reduced when hardness is above 600. And for this one in particular, amine formulations are typically more sensitive, so it's better to use an ester formulation if we can. And then the last thing related to things in our water, as I'll say, is alkalinity. So alkalinity refers to bicarbonate and carbonate levels in the water. Here in Saskatchewan, it's the bicarbonate levels that are relatively high. Again, can it reduce the efficacy of some herbicides? Common theme here that we're talking about. So those DIM group and 2,4-D, again, are some of the ones most affected. Bicarbonate levels as low as like 300 to 500 have reduced the activity of these herbicides. If levels are above 500 for those, it's usually recommended that we avoid using the water if possible. And water with levels above 1,000 should just definitely not be used for sprayer applications.
Okay, gotcha. So I've done some testing and I have hard water, hypothetically. Are there some things that I can do to alleviate hard water issues?
Sure, there's definitely some things we can do to help reduce issues that are caused by hard water. The first thing is just using the maximum recommended rate of herbicide. So make sure that we're not cutting any herbicide rates. Another thing we can do is spray immediately after mixing that spray solution. So don't mix it up and go for lunch and let it sit. We want to mix up that tank and go out and hit the field as soon as possible. If necessary, you can also add AMS to the spray solution. And if absolutely necessary, you can consider finding an alternate water source. That's obviously the last thing we want to have to do, but it is something we may need to consider. I just wanted to note here as well, I know some people think that reducing the amount of water applied with their glyphosate is a solution. I would say that's a watch out and a bad way to go, just because often now we're tank mixing our glyphosate with other products. And if we're tank mixing with a contact herbicide, that's going to lead to issues or reduce our efficacy of those contact herbicides as well.
Okay, so dugout water. I'm sure there are going to be some people who are going to ask if dugout water is okay to use. Do you have any thoughts on that?
For sure, yeah. So dugout water, common water source that is around the farm, and it can often be a good water source. There's definitely a couple things you want to consider when using dugout water specifically as well. The first thing being how clean the water is. So turbidity refers to the cleanliness of the water, so that's whether there's soil or organic matter in the water. And the reason we care about that is, again, those particles combine to herbicide molecules and reduce the efficacy of the herbicide. It can also cause us, it to block some nozzles and some screens as well. Glyphosate and diquat, probably the two most common, or two in particular that typically have issues when mixed with dirty water. Dicamba and bromoxynil also been noted to have some issues as well. So just be aware of how dirty the water looks. If you find it's like really murky looking, one thing you can do is, maybe add a filter before it's going into your water truck or going into your sprayer, just to try and catch and pull some of those particles out. Or if it's just, really dirty, you might want to consider finding an alternate water source, and maybe that dugout isn't the best thing to use. The other thing we want to consider is just water temperature. So water temperature can impact the herbicide's ability to go into solution. So this can impact herbicide efficacy just because we have that reduced solubility of the product. It can also cause a sludge to form in the bottom of the tank. So just again, another watch out. This is usually something that we typically will see more kind of in that early growing season timeframe, usually at pre-burn timing when the water being pulled from the dugout is still quite cold. One solution that I would have for this, is a simple solution for water temperature. Just have a pail of, 5-gallon pail of warm water. Mix your product in it before it goes into the chem handler or before it goes into the tank. Just make sure it goes into solution that way. And then that's kind of an easy way to still use that water source and kind of alleviate some of those cold water issues.
Okay, great. So I know that was a lot of talk on water and water quality, but do you have any final comments on water and water quality when it comes to herbicide application?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate the importance of it in your sprayer application. So water it's just such a key part of our herbicide applications. It makes up such a large portion of what's in our tank. Like you mentioned earlier, lots of factors can be out of our control, but water quality and the amount of water that we are using is just not one of them. So I really want to reiterate the importance of it. So have your water source tested, to understand your quality. One thing I would say is, if you had it tested already, maybe test it again. Changes in the water table, changes in runoff amount, those kinds of things can impact the results of your water test as well. So just always want to make sure that we're looking at it again and again. And then just use the appropriate amount of water and don't skip out to save yourself a trip. I definitely understand that, that the more water we use, the more time it takes, and, makes our logistics a bit more complicated and all that kind of thing. But you've already invested so much time and energy into your crops. It really is one thing that we can do to help with that herbicide efficacy, the crop safety of those applications as well. So don't skip out. Just make sure that we're using the appropriate water rates this growing season.
Okay, excellent. So that's pretty much all I had for questions. I am going to look at the questions that we have here. And honestly, I think you've answered most, if not all of them, through your presentation. But I will ask you this one, just if you can touch on this. Are you seeing the crops in very dry or very wet areas experience different reactions to herbicide applications?
So I would say, again, that actively growing plants is really key. Where I am, it is really, really dry. It's definitely concerning as well. I would say a lot of the applications are just beginning, so I haven't had the chance to see what our efficacy is looking like after those applications so far, because we are just getting into it. But again, yes, definitely a concern, as we want those plants to be actively growing, and just to help take in that herbicide and for our crop safety as well. So definitely a concern, but again, increasing our water rates is one thing that we can do to help in those situations as well.
Okay, one last question. Is there a way to, like, you touched on this, improving the effectiveness of your herbicide. Do you have any thoughts on using adjuvants?
Yeah, so adjuvants are something we can add to the tank to help with our herbicide efficacy and help those products. Again, I would just stress that before we add anything to the tank, just check that label, check with your local agronomist, check with the representative for that chemical manufacturer, just to make sure that what we are adding won't have any negative effects. You know, they are the experts on their products and how to use them. So if you are wanting, you know, some more tips, that is somebody I would recommend reaching out to. And again, I would just caution anytime we're adding something to the tank that is possibly outside of the typical label or what's recommended, just to make sure that we're asking more questions and details on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, and a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. That completes today's live stream. Unless, Nicole, you have any final words that you want to say?
No, I just wish everybody a happy and safe herbicide application season. And again, if you have any questions, just be sure to reach out to myself, anyone at Farmer's Edge, or, you know, there's lots of local experts in your area, so don't be afraid to ask some questions.
Awesome. Thanks again, Nicole. Again, that completes today's live stream. Please subscribe, click that alert button to stay informed on all our future live streams and uploads. So take care, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.